before we start learning about how we can test the security of networks, I would like to talk to you about the setup that we're gonna need to use in order to do this. So we're gonna need to use a number of tools and programs that run on Linux systems. You can install these tools manually if you want on any Linux operating system, or you can install a Linux distribution called Kali. Kali Linux is a distribution that it's based on Debian, and it contains most of the tools that we're going to need to use. It also has all these tools pre-installed and correctly configured and ready to be used. You can install Kali Linux as a main machine, so you can dial boot it with Windows or Linux or Mac OS or whatever you have as a main machine, and you select between the operating systems at boot, or you can install it as a virtual machine. I'm going to be installing it as a virtual machine, and I'm going to be using it as a virtual machine. I'd like to note that installing Kali Linux as a virtual machine doesn't make it any less useful than a main machine. You'll have all the tools, all the functionality of a main machine. The only downside to it is that you will not be able to access your internal wireless card. You're going to need to use an external USB card. Now this is not a big deal because external cards are cheap, and they're also the internal cards are not very well supported, and they're usually not good for penetration testing. They don't allow for packet injection, and some of them don't even allow for monitor mode. Now I haven't explained what monitor mode and packet injection is, but I will explain them once we get to them. So you can install it as a virtual machine. Basically, installing it as a virtual machine means you will install it, you'll be using it inside your current operating system. So if you're using Windows, or if you're using Mac, or if you're using Linux, you can use a virtualization program like VMware or VirtualBox, and you'll basically have a fully functional operating system inside your main operating system. We'll see how that works. It's very simple. It's not as complicated as it sounds. So there's two programs that allow us to install Kali Linux as a virtual machine. There you have VirtualBox and you have VMware. Personally, I prefer VMware, but they both work well and they both give you the same functionality. If you choose to go with VMware, then you don't actually need to install anything. You can just download a pre-installed version of Kali Linux using this link. I'll also put it in the resources on Udemy. So basically you'll just download that file, install VMware, install that download that file, and double click the file, and that's it. You have Kali Linux installed and ready to use. The only difference is these files, the pre-installed versions, usually come out after the release, after a week or maybe days, depending on when they want to make them and release them. Or the other option is you just download the ISO image. So ISO is basically just a bootable image. You can burn it on a CD, or you can just put it on a USB stick and boot from it, or you can just keep it on your hard drive and boot from it. And once we boot from it, we're gonna just do a normal install on Kali Linux. We'll go through the steps and see how we can install it. Now this process of installing from the ISO image, you can use it with VirtualBox, you can use it with VMware, or when you want to install it as a main machine. The only difference is that when you're doing it as a main machine, you want to be careful not to overwrite your other operating system. If you're, say, for example, if you have Windows and you want to dial boot with Windows, then you want to make sure you don't overwrite Windows when you install Kali. But what I'm going to be using, what I recommend, is installing it as a virtual machine, so installing it inside Windows or inside Linux. For me, I'm going to be installing it inside Linux, but it's the same. So all you need to do is download VMware or VirtualBox. You download them from their official websites. VMware Player, you can download it for free, as far as I know. So you download it, you install it. VirtualBox is free as well. The installation process of VMware and VirtualBox is very simple, so I'm not going to explain it. Both on Linux and Windows, you literally just download your version and then just go next, install it, and that's it, installed. Then we're going to download Kali Linux. So to download Kali Linux, you just go to their website, kali.org, downloads. I'll show you here. and you download your flavor. So if you're looking for 64 bits, if your system is 64 or 32, you download the one that you want. Make sure it's the ISO. You can download it as a torrent or as the ISO. You click it, it'll start downloading. I already have it downloaded. So once you actually have it downloaded, we're gonna see how we can install it using using VMware. It's the same process using VirtualBox, just a different program, and it's the same process as I said if you're installing it as a main machine. Just make sure you don't overwrite your own operating system when you do it as a main machine. Using VirtualBox or VMware, you will not be able to overwrite your main operating system, so it's risk-free. Even if you mess up anything, if you do anything incorrectly, it will not have any effect on your main machine, because basically VirtualBox or VMware, they literally create a virtual computer, so a virtual RAM, virtual CPU, virtual everything, in order to allow you to run this virtual machine. So now I'll show you how to install Kali Linux as a virtual machine inside VMware. I'm going to be using the ISO image, which I downloaded already from this link. So download that, install VMware or VirtualBox. Installation is simple, as I said, and the process of installing Kali Linux on either VMware or VirtualBox is the same. It's also the same process if you want to install it with Windows as dial boot, for example, but just make sure you don't overwrite the Windows files when you install it as dial boot. But when you install as a virtual machine, there's no way you can mess up your other installations, because everything is going to be installed on virtual physical on virtual hardware. So you're going to have virtual RAM, virtual hard drive, virtual everything, which basically means if anything goes wrong within your virtual machine, it will not affect your main machine. So the first thing I'm going to do is run VMware. And now I'm going to go on create a new virtual machine here. If you have the image burned on a CD, you can select it from this option, or you can use the use ISO image, which is what we downloaded. And I just have it here in downloads, and you can see here it's Kali Linux. So I'm going to open that. I'm going to click on next. Now it already knew it's a Linux, but it thought it's Ubuntu, and I'm going to change that to Debian, because it's Kali Linux is built on Debian. So you see here you have Debian 64 bits. I'm going to go next, and then I'm going to call it Kali 1.1.0a. Now that's just the name of the machine, and I'm going to click next. Now it's telling me how much the hard drive should be. So it's already putting it as 20 gigabytes, and I think that's enough, so I'm just going to leave it the way it is. So this is the virtual hard drive that that's we're going to use to install Kali Linux on. So click next, and then we can see here that's all the configurations that we chose. I'm going to modify this, so I'm going to customize, and I'm going to increase the amount of RAM to 1 gigabyte. Now you can increase this to whatever you want. You can also modify a few things here. You can modify the networking, you can modify the processors, all the resources that will be available to the virtual machine. So I changed that to 1 gigabyte here, and you have the network as NAT. I'm going to leave it the way it is, and I'm going to click on finish and close that. And now it's going to automatically boot the new virtual machine that we made, and it's gonna boot it from the ISO image that we picked. Now you can use the live the live option, basically just to boot into Kali, but it's gonna give you a functional Kali operating system, but anything you do on that operating system, it will be deleted the next time you boot the system. So it's basically just to see what the operating system is like, what tools are available on it. So I'm going to go down to the graphical install option. And this will basically allow me to install Kali Linux on the virtual hard drive. So it's asking me to select the language, and I'm going to keep it as English. Then it's asking me about the country that I'm in, and I'm going to change that to Ireland. So it's asking me for the host name now. I'm just gonna keep it as Kali, and I'm gonna go continue. And it's asking about the domain name now. I'm gonna keep that empty. Now I'm gonna put my password. This is the root password. Basically, the root account is the main administration account in Linux systems. So basically, this account has all privileges to do whatever you want on the system. So you might need to use this in the future. You will actually need to know this password, so make sure you remember it. So now it's asking me how do I want or where do I want to install Kali. If you're installing it as a main machine, you'd want to go probably on manual and make sure that you don't overwrite your Windows. Now, because we're installing it as a virtual machine, the hard drive, we're going to use the entire disk, which is the virtual hard drive that we created. So it's the 21 gigabytes that we selected at the start. I'm going to click continue. And we're going to put all files in the same partition. That's no problem. Continue. And it's just showing us now the configuration that we picked. I'm going to say this is perfect. And here it's just asking us to confirm that this is what we want. Now it's installing Kali on my virtual hard drive. So I'm going to pause the video now because there's no point of you just watching this installing. It's just going to make the video longer, and I'll resume when the installation is finished. Okay, now it's asking me, it's telling me that some of the packages that are going to be installed are available online. So the packages are actually on the live CD or on the live ISO image, but they're also available online. So if you check the online mirrors, then there might be newer versions of these packages, so you can download these newer versions. But for now, I'm actually gonna set it to no, and if I want to update, then I'm just gonna update after I install the whole system. Now it's asking me if it should install Grob on the main boot sector. Now Grob is the bootloader that's used with Linux, and it's asking me to do so because it didn't detect any other operating systems installed on my virtual machine. Now if you're doing this with Windows as a dial boot, then you should click no in here because that's not safe. But since we're installing it as a virtual machine, so it is going to be the only machine on this virtual machine, or the only operating system on this virtual machine, I'm gonna keep it at yes, and I'm gonna click on continue. Okay, now it's telling me that the installation was successful, so I'm gonna click on continue, and it's just gonna finish up and remove maybe some of the temporary files that were created. Okay, now it's actually booting up into my Kali Linux, the machine that we just installed. So now the installation is complete, and as you can see that we successfully installed Kali Linux as a virtual machine inside my main machine, which is Linux in this case, but you can do the same with Windows or Mac OS or any other operating system.